right, I'm going to move mine. Did you work with the new microphones yet, by the way?
No, but I did watch it. I saw how to.
So you know what you're doing.
I've been
Excellent.
learned. I've been schooled.
It's more, just so you know, it's more hours that need to be turned off more than yours. It's those speakers.
Okay.
So you guys are, it's fine if you, it's better if you do. It's more critical that you do.
Gotcha. Okay. Good? Okay. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on October 16th, 2019 in the Triton High School Library at 7 p.m. I will begin by reading the vision statement for the Regional School District. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families in the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. If you could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a full house tonight, which is really nice to see. My name is Nursa Wallen. I'm the chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I'll keep my remarks short because we're going to get to the important part really soon. Just real quick for my school committee members, school tours, it's that time again. So we'd like to set those up. If you can let me know by email the best times. It, of course, has to be during the school day, but if there are specific days of the week that work for you, times of the day that work better, that type of thing, let me know. We'll get those scheduled, and then I can get a schedule out to you. All right. Oral communications from the public. All right, seeing none, I'm going to move on to the Student of the Month. This was a tradition that we established last year. We unfortunately only got to do about, I think, 4 months of it before the school year ended. At the beginning of this school year, we were excited to start this tradition again and received a number of nominees. So the way this works is any of the Triton Regional School District staff can nominate a student for this honor. They identify one of the specific traits that we'd like to see in our Student of the Month, and then they actually provide a very short narrative. The nominator for this month's Student of the Month was Joshua Noble, so if he could approach the microphone, please. He's going to tell us a little bit about our Student of the Month.
We're good now. All right. Well, I'm Josh Noble, and thank you, because I think you knocked it out of the park. You couldn't find a better candidate for Student of the Month. You could check off all the boxes for this young lady. I do not know any other student who has overcome and has grown up more in the face of adversity. Emily has navigated a wide array of obstacles. First of all, she has worked through her reading difficulties. Her tutor, Miss McConnell, Fran, who's here, stated to me that when she first started working with her, Emily really struggled with reading. Emily has worked tremendously hard, and her reading has improved greatly. Another obstacle she has overcome is that she is a dedicated mother who takes great care of her beautiful daughter. I don't know where Ellie is, but she is so cute. And on top of being a mother, she works 20 to 30 hours a week. Emily also has her license and bought her own car with the money she's earned. With all this going on, Emily has worked very hard to make up credits through credit recovery, both during the year and over the summer. This has resulted in her being on schedule to graduate with her peers this spring. Not only is she going to graduate, she was an honor roll student all of last year and is still an honor roll student as of this quarter right now. She excelled in all of her classes, even winning the end of the year award for her English class. Emily has a determination and will that is unmatched. After graduation, she plans to attend Northern Essex Community College for Nursing, start her own dog walking business, which she's already started, and eventually own a doggy daycare. Emily is one of the most resourceful and hardworking people I know, who does not take no for an answer. In a time when many criticize this generation for not working hard, Emily is the exception. I do not think you could find a more deserving candidate to be Student of the Month for the Triton School District. There she is. That's that beautiful old girl. Thank you, guys.
you.
Congratulations. There you go.
Yeah. Come on, guys. Come on. Ellie, come here. Come on, Fran. Come on. Mama wants to take a picture with you. Yes, you are.
Yes, please.
Go get mommy first. Come on, let's take a picture. Look. I guess we can go home after this picture. Smile. Smile, get your hand out of your face. I want a hug.
Absolutely.
I didn't
Can you just pull down the mic?
Didn't make anything special, but I do want to say thank you to the Reach staff because you guys have been a tremendous support in my life for the past 2 to 3 years. And I probably wouldn't be here without my daughter because she is what keeps me going every single day. And my best friend in the back over there, 2 of my best friends who keep me going every single day. You guys are all awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's such a pleasure to honor these students. You don't need to hang out. You can if you want, but thank you. This is such a big, happy group. I love it. Nothing. All right. I'm going to move on to item 5, the consent agenda. I'll read aloud the donations. There are quite a few this month. A check in the amount of $300 from Community Service of Newburyport, Inc. to be used for Newbury Elementary School student needs in the health office. An anonymous check in the amount of $750 to be used for Newbury Elementary School grade 6 students needing financial assistance in attending the W. Alton Jones Environmental Education Camp. A check in the amount of $2,000 to fund 4 Newbury Elementary School grade 6 students needing financial assistance in attending the W. Alton Jones Environmental Education Camp. Payment for a 3-year lease on 30 Chromebooks and a cart valued at $9,945 donated by the Newbury Elementary School PTA to support learning in the classroom. A mini coat, I assume that's pronounced, 27-inch roll laminator valued at $1,540.78 donated by the Pine Grove School PTA to be used by staff at the Pine Grove School. A check in the amount of $500 from Mr. and Mrs. Michael Alder to be used for Salisbury Elementary School students at the principal's discretion. A check in the amount of $3,000 from the Institution for Savings to be used by Triton High School students for robotics team equipment, kits, and competitions. Can I get a motion to approve? Oh, one more.
Can I just add one clarifying bit of information? You'll see in here, school field trip D. So the middle school has been doing a trip to Quebec or Montreal the past few years. They're changing the trip to DC this coming spring. So just to note that, if you want, when they come back for final approval, they can give you more of a full presentation, but this is in here for planning approval at this point. Same trip, 1 extra day. It's 4 days rather than 3 days, but it's to DC, which tends to be the more traditional 8th grade trip and fits now with the 8th grade civics curriculum.
Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
Yes.
yeah, Dina,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Could we pull the minutes from the Finance Committee, please? I have questions on that.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we'll have Deb come back to that in the subcommittee section. Those are the ones from the September 25th meeting, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, all in favor? All right, unanimous. And moving on to Ms. Kaylee Abbott Bishop, the Student Advisory Report, please.
Throughout the Triton District, members of the community are being met with new questions and concerns over what it means to be a Viking. Should old traditions remain or should new ones be brought in? With the new age comes the opportunity for all voices to be heard in order for our district to be the best it can possibly be. A large amount of the sense of community is brought to us through the help of our school council. At the last meeting, members discussed many ideas in which to improve our environment. The most prevalent topic on the table was the school improvement plan, also referred to the SIP. The main focus for this school year and the SIP is to expand upon the Triton vision of a graduate. To properly conduct this, they are working to identify the skills and characteristics that are valued in students. From there, they are working backwards to create 6 core values that they wish to find. With this in mind, the Council is working to decide how these values will be instilled and represented in both the program of studies and daily lives within this community. The change in said values may potentially result in alterations towards graduation requirements, but as work is still being done, it is unclear at the moment. On the topic of graduation, the Council is in the process of discussing the possibility of changing graduation to Friday as opposed to the Saturday morning that is so commonly known among Tritonians. While no decision has been made, this information has leaked out into the student body. However, it is a quite controversial topic. Some are in favor of the change because it allows them to graduate earlier, sleep in, and also avoid that pesky sunburn that many, most notably the performers, sport in the days following. Others prefer for graduation to remain as is because it allows for time between graduation and grad night, meeting family, and even, as some have said, better lighting for pictures. The movement of Principal Kelly into the high school has brought about what is being regarded as a new age for possibilities. And with this new age, he brings his hopes for the integration of student agency, advocacy, and voice. With this in mind, he's hoping to integrate the student body into more of the decisions being made within the district. One such example is the past Professional Development Day, in which a number of students were invited to work alongside faculty in order to provide feedback and help with planning. Those in attendance feel as though their opinions were well received and thought of in the decisions made. While they believe it went well, many are questionable as to how much of their input is actually being followed through with. This mindset is no doubt a direct result of experiences with Triton in the past. There is no doubt among those that walk the halls of the high school that the vision and actuality of a student has changed over the years. With this in mind, the school handbook is being redone. The student body hopes that the changes made will allow for individuality and accept that the image of a student is changing as we speak. It will definitely be interesting to see what will happen. With all of these things being taken into account, the matter of why, in the common catchphrase, why Triton, is being drastically altered. Both Principal Kelly and the rest of the community helped to change the slang meaning of why Triton into one that holds a more positive connotation. In the updating of the Triton website that is hopefully to come within the academic year, there have been mentions of reworking the common video that most are familiar with. With the frequent use as why Triton in a negative manner, it will be interesting to see how the students react to this change. Student Council is aware of the majority of the change that surrounds us at this time. It is with these facts that new visions that homecoming events are being planned. As we are from Massachusetts, it's hard to completely do away with tradition. However, we are trying to bring a new age to events. While things are not completely yet finalized, all of the events are still happening, but some are being given a new twist. For example, common dress-up days are being altered, such as, hopefully, what was formerly Formal Friday becoming Flannel Friday, and the addition of a meme day in which one dresses up as their favorite meme. Games such as crab soccer are being considered over whether they are to remain or not. All in all, the entire community is seeing change while also holding onto some traditions. Thank you, and please ask any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Kaylee. Any questions?
I just wanted to make a comment. I appreciate the thoughtfulness put in the student report. I think it's really great to see the students taking ownership over what it means to be of Viking and helping build the culture, because we can only do so much, even as a school committee and the faculty. It really is what you guys want to do. So I'd be really interested in without putting you on the spot and asking you a bunch of questions, because I did write down a bunch of things. If you could bring back in future reports in terms of how things are progressing, in terms of what it means to be a Viking student, what are the 6 core values that you guys have defined. I'd really love to see that, because that will help us with planning, because everything that we do is for the students. So I think this is wonderful that you guys are taking ownership of that. So I'm really interested to see that work.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments? I'll just echo Tina and just say it was nice kind of having the rundown of events in the past, but it's really nice to see, I think, your personality probably and the culture of what's going on with student council and probably the e-board coming through in the student report as well, because that gives us it's a much, it's not just the list, it's the feel. So I appreciate that. All right, yeah?
And if I can just say, I love the discussion about why Triton, because I think that's been a past discussion. It's ebbed and flowed from more of a jeer to an actual positive note. So I can tell you that website will absolutely be redone within this year, sooner rather than later. But I'm looking forward to a revamped Why Triton video and entire campaign. Love it.
All right, thank you, Kaylee. I'll say, as always, you're welcome to hang around if you want and have a voice, but if you
here
have
all
places to go, we totally understand.
That's right.
Thank you. All right, new business? Any new business?
I have
Tina?
one thing. School committee is aware, the administration is aware, but I think it should be publicly announced that my term is up this spring, and I am not running for reelection. So if anybody is watching this, I hope that you contact either me or anybody on school committee to ask us about what this job entails, the time commitment, all of it, and be involved. I'm hoping we get a lot of candidates that really are energized and willing to do some awfully hard work, but also very gratifying. Thanks.
Thank you, Dina, and I appreciate you making that public now so that we're,
Well, there's still a chance to rethink her decision.
right.
Early
well,
and often, yeah.
Yes.
Just checking.
All right. Any other new business? All right, moving on. District Communications Committee. So I don't think, we didn't have the minutes done from last week's meeting in time to get into the packet. So I'll give you the real quick rundown, I guess, on that. So as you know, we're moving through the regional agreement proposed changes through this fall with the hope of bringing a revised regional agreement to the town meetings in the spring. I have to say, so far, the town cooperation with that goal, we all seem to be bought in, all the boards that are involved, which is terrific. So Newbury, unfortunately, could not get to the review of, let me go back really quick. On the September 5th meeting, we went through kind of the proposals that had been put out by the school committee way back in 2017, which had then been tabled to begin the discussions about an alternative assessment calculation and the landlord-tenant agreement. So we brought those back up at the September 5th meeting. They were clear that there were some things in there that there was not broad support for, and some that were very much acceptable or even welcomed by everyone around the table. So working from that draft, the towns, particularly Raleigh and Salisbury in this case, brought those to finance committees and the boards of selectmen to have them go through those, see if there was anything that would receive, broader comment, and also to bring forward any proposals that might come out of their boards, knowing that we as a school committee wouldn't have thought of everything. So we wanted to get that input from all the town boards as well. Newbury and Salisbury Rowley and Salisbury did not suggest any additional changes, and they did not have any questions, comments, or otherwise on the draft. It seemed to be satisfactory to them. The Newbury Board of Selectmen did not get a chance to review it. They're going to be going through it at the end of October with the intent to bring any comments or questions to the November DCC meeting. I also intend to bring the draft as it exists back to the school committee at our November meeting so that we can have a broader discussion on kind of where it's at right now. And then, we'll continue to kind of move that process forward as we go through the fall months and into the winter. We also talked about the advances at the state level to a large degree. I had sent emails, but the Student Opportunity Act, it continues to move forward. It cleared the Senate with some amendments that actually went in our direction, which was nice to see. Things that we had things that we had asked for that typically got combined with other asks and put through as kind of a consolidated set of amendments. So that was nice to have. I didn't talk about it at that meeting because it hadn't happened yet, but just for whatever, the supplemental budget for fiscal year 19, the year that we just closed, but the state has not yet, actually moved into the House today and is being debated. And it looks like that will include some additional regional transportation and circuit breaker funding for the district, hopefully. I hope it stays in as it goes through the Senate. And then the last thing is that the state is still looking at additional revenues, unanticipated revenues for this year, fiscal year 20. Senator Goby and Senator Tarr have already put forward a letter asking that that a fiscal year 20 supplemental budget bill include a boost to bring regional transportation to 85% reimbursement. I believe getting additional signatures because I was told today that people have been signing on to that letter beyond them, but at the time that it reached us, it had Senator Tarr's and Senator Goby's signatures on it. So that's a brief rundown of the District Communication Committee, and I'll move on to interim school business administrator arrangements.
So the purpose is a very brief explanation of where we're at currently. Michelle is not here tonight because of a conflict, not because she's left. I was noticing the absence here as I was saying that. So we are set to have, I believe I had mentioned in some terms last month, David Jack, who is a retired superintendent, business administrator, assistant superintendent from Amesbury and other districts, is going to be coming on for 2 days a week. Amy Posick, who is our current district treasurer, who is in the office 1 day a week currently, plus as needed, is going to be picking up an additional day, plus the as needed. And then we'll also be adding some capacity to Karen Denon, who was our district accountant, and compensating her for that. So it is, I believe we mentioned it last month, this is not the hope from December 1st to June 30th to innovate and bring new and exciting, expanding the opportunities through the business office. This is about surviving through the balance of the year, building off of all of the success that Michelle has brought over the last 3 years, the relationships she's built with the schools and the secretaries and processes, keeping those in place. And finding the next school business administrator. So I will say there have been some discussions. There are folks who have found out and have piqued their interest. So I do get the sense that there is a potential that it may not be that we would have to wait until June 30th. As I had shared with you, I'm going to start the process right after the holidays. I think at this point, any search gets lost between now and the holidays, but have that ready to go on the street right when we return into the calendar flips 2020, be interviewing by the end of January, a process into February, and then hopefully wrapping that up at the latest by early March. I am going to put together a committee. It will include, like we did last time, reach out to someone from one of the town finance committees to get some broad representation in making that selection. But I'm hopeful that there will be candidates potentially. Again, we're going to go with the right candidate, and if it means we have to wait till July 1st for the right person, we'll wait till a July 1st start. But I'm hopeful that there may be some candidates who would be the right candidate and be able to start earlier than a July 1st start. So all of the arrangements with Amy, with Dave Jack, and with Karen would be on a per diem basis or on a prorated basis. So if we can start a new person as of April 1st, we would stop that interim and move into the permanent. But we're on a good pace at this point in time.
All right. Any questions for Brian on the?
I should also add, Dave is going to join the finance subcommittee next week. I believe it's next Wednesday, right? A week from today. He'll be joining the finance subcommittee for introductions. And I should say, so, I keep saying, I know, these guys are used to it. So when you hire someone as a per diem, they're paid hourly. It's a significant hourly rate, so we're not going to pay Dave to come, and I would say this if he were sitting here, we're not going to pay him to come to meetings that night. So it's those types of things. You won't see him that much, perhaps during budget season, some. In the subcommittees will be sure, that's right. But those will be on the days when he's here in the office routinely, so it's not a full-time person that you're going to see all the time, because if it were a full-time rate, it would be unaffordable.
Yes. And I think too, Brian and I had talked through this, but this all exists within Michelle's existing salary line.
Great
So
point.
it's not like there's an additional spend coming from these arrangements.
Yep.
These are all happening within
Yep.
that existing line.
Yep,
So,
on budget.
yep. Any other questions? All right, moving on to our two biggest topics of the night, the first of which is MCAS and accountability.
Sorry.
So
Can you stick your mic on, Kim? Thank you.
I was talking to Debbie Choate, and she said last night at Pentucket, they had their MCAS presentation, and they had 55 slides. We have 75, so we beat them. No, just kidding. No, we didn't. We have 33 with a few transition slides, so. In thinking about today's presentation, I wanted to create a couple of big pictures for folks. One is to look at our achievement level across the grade level, to look at our growth, and also to identify areas that we can celebrate, but also be very much aware of certain areas that we need to pay attention to in the future. So, oops. All right. So those are the goals. Before we get into the actual data, I think it's important to remember to think about that the role of our jobs, and that is really to educate the whole child. And I truly believe that the principals act accordingly to that, and all of the teachers, so that we look at this data and it helps to shed some light on some areas of need, but it doesn't tell the complete picture of everybody's town. So I think it's important, if you have additional questions and you want to dig a little deeper, there is a lot of information on the Department of Ed website, but you can also contact the principals, you can contact me, and I'd be more than happy to go through some of these layers with you. Okay, so in looking at the big picture, we want to make sure that we're focusing in on all the important components of educating our children, which include emotional, environmental, intellectual, physical, occupational, social, and financial well-being. Oops. I'm trying to do this sitting down. I told Brian I usually am standing up and clicking, but I said I'll take a risk and sit down and click at the same time.
Grab that mic if you want to.
And what, stand up or sit down? No, I'm trying to change it up a little bit.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if you wanted to, I believe that mic is totally mobile, so, and Alexa could turn you on.
I'm trying to expand my horizons and my comfort zone, so I can actually sit back there and look. That actually might not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Apologize to me.
Take some of my papers. Oops. And my water. I feel like. All right. Okay. So Massachusetts has some new accountability indicators, and I gave a presentation last year on all these indicators. Achievement, obviously, which is weighted the most out of all the indicators, student growth, chronic absenteeism, and let me just say that the chronic absenteeism includes first grade through sixth grade at the elementary school, all of middle school, all the way up to grade 12. So even includes grades that are not taking the MCAS. So just to make that clarification. English language proficiency. Right now we have currently about 24 EL students within our school district. The majority of them are at the high school level and are beyond the MCAS grade, and we also have a few at the early primary grade, so they have not taken the MCAS. They're looking for the English language proficiency that they have within 6 years reach that level of proficiency. And if they're on target, they should. So they track that through the MCAS as well as the access assessment. In addition, the high school has some additional indicators. They have the 4-year, obviously, the graduation rate. They have extended engagement rate, which is looking at after a student has completed 4 years of high school and has not graduated, and they are entering in their 5th year. As a district, can we continue to keep those students engaged so that by the end of that 5th year or even 6th year, do they earn their diploma? And so that's the other piece that they take into consideration when they're looking at the high school completion, as well as the annual dropout rate. A new category they're looking at is the advanced coursework, and that's really about the percentage of 11th and 12th graders who can complete at least one advanced course, and that does not necessarily mean or attach to an AP course, nor does it mean that they actually have to take the AP exam. So they're really looking to increase the number of students who are enrolled in some of these challenging academic coursework. And so with all of these accountability indicators, the state creates a target. And so based on how close you are to that particular target, you're assigned a number of points. So when you look at our category, it's going to take all of these indicators, add the number of points, if you would, that we actually accumulate based on these indicators, and tells you what percentage of points you've met. And obviously, the more points the more targets that you met. So obviously, the greater percentage, you're going to be in a higher category than some of the other school districts. Any questions about the accountability indicators? And this is mandated. This is not something that the Massachusetts Department of Ed has created. They have to do this because of ESSA, the Every Child Can Succeed Act. Every student can succeed. So they're obligated, because we take federal funds, to put these safeguards in place to make sure that how we are using our funding is appropriate and making significant changes within our education system.
Deb, did you have a question? You have to hit your button.
Yeah, I was just, we had mentioned earlier about trying to compare ourselves to ourselves.
Right.
You know, and so this is going to make that a little bit difficult?
Not really,
No?
because these actually, the indicators, the targets are based on our targets that we set. So if we perform, say, in the 70th percentile, let's just say that number, maybe next year our target is to perform at the 73rd percentile. So we're comparing our growth and our achievement against our previous year's standing or results. We're not being compared with this criteria against other districts. We do have an area within our reporting that we look at the percentile, and that is basically taking all of the schools, and they're divided into 2 categories. We have the high school and the non-high school. And so we're pretty much right in the middle of the pack if you wanted to compare us to all the rest of the schools within the state of Massachusetts. But these indicators are targets that really the state has created, yes, but based on our previous year's performance. Does that make sense? Okay. Good question, though. I'm like, here we go, okay. So the first indicator, which receives the most weight of that formula, is looking at achievement. And for achievement, I can say I've actually developed just bar graphs. And in previous years, I actually did start to compare us to other schools. I thought this would be hopefully a more simplistic slide to digest. I also think it pretty much captures where we are. I look to see if there are any trends, and honestly, in achievement level, I did not necessarily see any trends either at grade level or any particular school. So I think this is a realistic picture or snapshot of where we have been this year, but also I would say in previous years where it's maybe gone up or down a little bit. I can tell you for ELA, we are slightly above the state where our achievement levels are for ELA. But again, looking for any specific trends as far as increasing that, I call it grow the green, it's remained pretty consistent, I would say. So if you look at the colors, the really darker green is exceeding expectations. The lighter green on that is meeting expectations. Blue is partially meeting expectations, and red is not meeting expectations. So we have a very small percentage of students who are not meeting expectation, and I think a couple of different places for us to look at more layers or dig deep is looking at schools, looking at grade levels, looking at subgroups, and that gives us a little bit more information so that we can respond appropriately to the information and the data that we have in front of us. Any questions about ELA grades 3 through 8? Okay, so math, we are slightly below the state or just about even with the state. And you can see that we really have had some struggles at the third grade level, and that's definitely and I don't want to say third grade level, it shows up at third grade. We need to dig down into even second grade, first grade, and kindergarten, and what's going on within the classes, what is the curriculum, we know what the curriculum looks like, what's the pedagogy, and are our students developing some strong number sense as they continue to progress through more challenging concepts. So we first see a glimpse of that in third grade, and that is an area that I have seen a slight decline where I've seen an increase in growth and achievement in the upper grades in math. I've actually seen a decline over the last 3 years. When I'm looking for trends, I'm always looking for at least 3 data points. Anything beyond that, it's hard to tell, especially with all the different new assessments that we have had, new standards, and even doing it online. We could say that, third grade was their first year online, but again, and I don't mean to compare, but when you look at other school districts who have been in the same situation as us, and across the state, we're still below. So we need to acknowledge that and then have some conversations and learn more so that we can act accordingly.
Kim, real quick before you move on, which cohort here was the first set of kids that would have started with math and focus in kindergarten?
Right, so this is our 5th year. So this represents the 4th year. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 4th grade would be the first ones, I would say. Yep. So again, looking just at achievement level, we're looking at 5th grade achievement levels. And this achievement level, I did see some trends. So that's why you see this broken out into 1 grade level across 3 years. So you see 2017, you see 2018, and 2019. And there is a clear indication that we are absolutely growing the green. And this did not happen by accident. We have put a lot of effort and energy and resources. And teachers have done some great jobs developing some structures within their schools, providing opportunities for teachers to collaborate, visit each other's classrooms, as well as PD, and you can see that those efforts absolutely paid off, not just at the 5th grade level. I it was supposed to be the next one, but you'll see it at the 8th grade level. But as we move on and looking at this science grade 5 achievement trend, I just wanted to show it with a graph as well, that you can see in 2017 we were at 50%. In 2018, there was a change within the science MCAS. At one point, they were kind of toggling between the old standards and the new standards, and then they phased out the older standards and then moved to the newer standards. So you do see a dip in that, and then they're back up to 58%. So I think that speaks to the fact that as a district, when we can collaborate and pull resources and create structures, strong structures, to look at the data and then to create action plans, that in a certain amount of time, it doesn't happen in 1 year, 2 years, this is 3 years. And I only anticipate from what I have seen that this will continue to be the trend and continue to grow. I will also say, again, we're not comparing, but we are very much above the state with our science achievement levels, which was not the case a few years ago. It's definitely not the case. So
Can I just clarify, Kim? So that 50, 44, 58 is students in the meeting or exceeding expectations?
Correct. So going on to science, 8th grade achievement, again, you see the data that's showing that we're absolutely growing the green. And this year we had the highest percentage of students who either exceeded or met the expectation. And to look at that over time within a line graph, again, you see that dip at 40%, which to me speaks to the changing of the assessment to 61% in 2019. So, it really does make a huge difference when we can pull resources and things together at all levels, really. It's really about all the levels working in unison, and then you get the results.
So can I just say, so for science, we have 3 years of data, so we have 3 data points.
Correct.
But again, to go back to achievement, I would call this a flawed way to measure, because you're measuring 3 cohorts of students.
Right.
So it's data, it's informative, and it's telling, and it shows that we're making the right investments. And you can do this with 3, better with 5, better with 7, better with 10. You can't do it with 2. But just to clarify, when Kim gets to the growth, that's literally following cohorts and individual students. And that's the piece that allows us to compare ourselves to ourselves and see where we're growing individual students.
So grade 10, so we're still talking about the indicators, and we're still talking about achievement. But the nuance in grade 10 is that this was their first year of the next generation MCAS for ELA and math. Science, it was paper pencil, so it wasn't online, and they're still testing kind of those overlap standards, where the standards are not purely reflective of the new standards. And for me, there was limited data points to look for trends. So all of the webinars that I participated in at the state level were basically saying it's really hard to dig deep beyond this first year. They also put a lot of safeguards in place as they're making that transition for where they want that score to be that qualifies students for earning their high school diploma. So they definitely put a few safeguards in place for that. So for ELA, grade 10 achievement, again, you see the colors. The darker green is exceeding expectations. The lighter green is meeting expectations. So we still have 28% who are partially. It's important to know that within that, for all of them, within that partially meeting expectations, you could have a high percentage of kids who are, we call them cuspy kids, who are maybe 1 or 2 point from meeting expectations. You also could have them, a large group at this end as well, too. So that's another layer we really need to peel back and think about where those scores are. Also look at the writing as opposed to the reading standards. So there is certainly more work to be done around this data to unpack it. But again, I would say for grade 10, we were above the state in regards to ELA achievement at grade 10. This is math grade 10 achievement. And this was an area that I would say we were below the state, so really having an urgency to look at the alignment of the standards to make sure that our alignment of what's happening at the high school level within those 10th grade classes or above are aligned to the state standards and make adjustments where necessary. So some of that work has to be done at the school level with the program coordinators and the teachers. And we've already have things set in motion and some tools to allow them to do that as well. This is 10th grade achievement. Last year, we bumped down not last year, the year before that in 2018. And because of the work that they looked and that was their issue, there was some of their standards were not in line with what they were actually teaching, so they had to do some curriculum work to make sure those standards were aligned to what the curriculum was. This year, they're also implementing a new science curriculum, so they've updated all of their curriculum and their resources that they're using, so that's very exciting, and they've only been using it, I would say, for a month and a half, but the feedback is very promising of what they're using. And it's not I should say this too, it's not a new program, but it's an updated textbook. I think some of them came to you a while back with very old textbooks. Yeah, falling apart. So those textbooks no longer exist. And I want to say, actually, those textbooks are now on the Chromebook. So again, kind of showing the transition of using a hybrid for resources as opposed to just a stationary textbook. The information is constantly getting updated through the web. So it's fairly exciting for the teachers and the students to have that real-time, have those real-time resources available. So that was the one indicator. Again, it has the heaviest weight within our accountability system. Second to achievement level is the growth. And that's really what Brian is talking about when you're saying, okay, we can certainly project different cohorts and where they landed for achievement, but every cohort has their own achievement level, if you would. And so that varies. And so that could be accounting for some of the ups or the lows or the downs. And when there's no trends, that's my assumption. When you start looking at growth, that's taking somebody, and what the state will do is they do student growth percentiles. And so what they will do is then take a group of students who particularly had a certain achievement level one year, and then they anticipate what their growth will be, and they set targets. So as a district, one of the messages that we really try to promote is that it's so important to look at the growth of our students and to make sure that we are making significant gains so that in the long run that we are preparing them for college and career ready. The growth, I can say, for the majority of our groups was very high, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. So let's look at what our growth looks like. And I talked a little bit about this, but growth allows us to focus on the complexity of teaching that whole child. So again, going back to that original visual where you see that when you're educating a child, it's not just about read this article, create a summary. If they're coming in with social and emotional issues, it's really hard for them to focus. So again, every child is very complex and getting more complex. So that really has to be taken into consideration. Growth also allows us to be open to the multiple forces that impact a student's ability to achieve. Not having access to a computer at home, not having access to just support of people who are around them that can check in or help them with their reading or their writing or their mathematics at night. So all those environmental aspects absolutely play into a child's ability to reach their full potential. Growth allows us for many measures of success that may vary and are constantly evolving. I think I want to point out that I use the example of student A and student B. You could have a child who is working really below grade level, okay, so grade level is here, and below grade level is here, grade level is here, has almost closed that entire achievement gap, worked really hard, made maybe even more 1 year's growth for that child in that short amount of time, but they still have not met expectations in the eyes of the state, so then we don't get those points, or that child doesn't get that credit. But we know, looking at their growth percentiles, growth percentiles can range anywhere from 40 to 60, that they have expanded where we thought that they would go. So we need to celebrate that and understand that growth is absolutely an important part of this whole picture. And that's also true for the other student who every year comes in high, and if you look at their achievement level, they only move a little bit, right? So that also tells us that we need to make sure that we're closing the gap here, but also attending to those students who need more of a challenge. And this up here is actually more difficult than getting that growth percentile up on this end. So two very different profiles of students, but that's, I think, really tells the story of why growth is important to look at for teachers. So if we look at grades 3 through 8 combined, looking for trends, we see that we do see some solid growth occurring. Remember, I said anywhere between 40 and 60 is what they would look for growth. So at 53 last year, we were over halfway, and they would consider that good growth. For math, you can see we started in 2017 at 36 percentile growth. That's actually below where we want them to be. In 2018, that growth percentile moved up to 54, so kind of right a little bit over mid-mark, and then that has gone up as well to 56 growth percentile in 2019. So over that halfway point, and again, that would be categorized as, I want to say, it's either, I think it's high growth. They break it down into high growth, moderate growth, and low growth. But that definitely is the high growth. They say anything above 50 is considered good. That's where they want you to be. We want to be even higher than that. So that was something that we celebrated with the teachers as well as the principals, and that we were in a good trajectory as far as that goes. We do not have student growth percentiles for the high school, only because the assessment was new. So we will start to develop those as they become more, they build some history around there. So in addition to achievement, again, highest weighted indicator, the second highest is growth. They've added these additional indicators. I've already talked a little bit about these, the English language proficiency, the chronic absenteeism, high school completion, and the percentage of students completing at least one advanced course. So I want to say all of these combined, I believe, make up about 10% of that weight, and the other ones make up the rest of it, so they're more heavily weighted. If we look at the additional indicators and you go onto the Department of Ed, if you look at the bottom of that report, it will show you a couple different things. It's going to break down those additional indicators at the bottom where it says chronic absenteeism, advanced coursework completion, and then you'll see to the right of that specific points. The highest number of points, if you've met your target, is 4. 2 means that you've made some progress. So in chronic absenteeism, we've made some gains. We have not hit the target that the state wanted us to be at based on our own performance or chronic absentee figures last year, but we did make some improvement. Now remember, this is reflective of all the schools. There are certainly schools who have 100% met their target and received 4 points because they hit that target rate. On On the top, I want to draw your attention to the groupings, and it's really not a great color as I'm looking at it right now. But the groupings on the top, they break it down to all students, and then they have lowest performing students. And that's a new category that basically looks at, as a district and as a school, your lowest performing students on the MCAS and sets a target for them. They could be students who have IEPs, they could be students who don't have IEPs, but they're basically taking that lowest percentage and saying, we want to focus on this, and we want you to make certain gains within this subgroup, because they're our most at-risk subgroup. So that's where you see those two things kind of separated out. You also see to the right the high school grades, and you see those separated from the left, which is the non-high school grades. So you can see those additional indicators from below that. If you look at the advanced coursework, you can see there that we have actually declined the number of students, the number of opportunities for students to take advanced coursework. So that's very concerning. So we did not, it's more, I say we didn't get the points, but it's bigger than not just getting the points. It's saying that we need to shed some light on this to make sure, and it doesn't start at high school, I have to tell you. These are things we have to start considering at the middle school and even upper elementary. How can we excel learning for some of those kids who are ready for it? I mean, we talk about those kids and that growth up here, so that when they get to the high school, they are very ready and capable to be taking some more advanced courses. So all of those indicators.
Kim?
Yes, absolutely.
When you say advanced coursework, is that just AP? Or is it
No,
honors?
there's many, I shouldn't say there's many. There are different types of coursework. So AP is certainly one of the courseworks, but you could have dual enrollment from a college, where we did at one time and they kind of pulled back. So that would be an opportunity. There's another one, and I can't think of the acronym because I know Patrick has been.
IB?
International Baccalaureate. Yep.
That was one of them. I know,
Specifically, like STEM programming, that a lot of it's computer science, engineering, that type of stuff. But
Yeah.
there's a specific,
There's an acronym for it.
specific curriculum around
Yeah.
it. So it's not just that you offer computer science classes, it's specific. Kind of still offer.
Computer, yeah. So it's again, it's putting light in an area that we need to do some more research and make different pathways for kids and make it accessible to all students, really. So then all of those indicators, all of those targets then put schools into different categories. So 85% of the schools within the state of Massachusetts are going to be placed in not requiring assistance or intervention. About 15% are going to be placed in the requiring assistance or intervention. Seeing if this works. It's my laser, does not work. Okay. You can see down at the bottom where they talk about cumulative criterion reference targets. That's where they set targets based on your performance the previous year, whether we're talking about growth or achievement. And so they take all of those different indicators, they add them up, and they look at the percentage of targets that you met. If you were able to hit 75% to 100% of those targets, you would be placed in the meeting or exceeding targets. If you were at 50 to 75% of your targets, you were at the substantial progress towards targets. And then you can see where those categories start to decline based on the percentage of targets that they have met. So for Triton, as a district, we were at substantial growth towards target. So that's something to be proud of. We have hit targets, not just hitting targets, but exceeding targets and showing really good growth across all content areas. The high school was also in that category. The middle school was in that category, Pine Grove was in that category, and so was Salisbury. The one school that was not in that category, that was in a school of recognition for high growth, which was, there were very few in the state that actually hit this category, and that was Newberry Elementary, for the amount of growth that they had achieved in the course of a year. So kudos to Beth and to her entire staff and to the students for working hard, and not to say that nobody else is working hard, everybody is working hard, but that is a really great honor and should be celebrated as a district. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the percentages that folks were able to achieve. Looking at the high school in 2018, we were able to reach 40% of our targets. In 2019, we were able to reach 64%. Looking at the weight, this will eventually be divided into 3 years. There's no way the state could come in and say 100% of your cumulative criterion reference points are going to be based on 1 year. So they take the most recent year and weight that more. So you can see that this 2019 was weighted in the equation 60%. In 2018, it was 40%. They will add 1 more year onto that, and then they will take those 3 with different weights and then come up with a percentage. And so based on those 2 years for the high school, they hit the 55%, and that's substantial progress towards targets. For the middle school, 62% in 2018. 2019, they hit 65%. They're at 64% for their cumulative criterions reference target. Pine Grove, 2018, was at 77%, and they were at meeting all of their targets. They dropped in 2019, and they were at 69% of their targets. And so, again, just trying to look and unpack at that data, but that is still a high percentage towards meeting and reaching their targets that were set. Newberry, in 2018, they were at 77% of their annual criterion reference targets, and in 2019, they had 94% they hit of all of their targets. That is amazing. So again, something to be celebrated. It's remarkable. And so again, if you take those 2 years weighted differently, they get that cumulative criterion reference target at 87%, meeting or exceeding expectation.
Kim, could I ask a question on that? I think you're right to point out and celebrate Newberry Elementary, and also right to say that the other schools have done very well. Given the fact that Newberry has done so well, I'm sure the principals have had discussions, but just to say this out loud, about what they've done that might have been different that might be implemented in the other schools, or maybe it's nothing. I don't know, but has that been looked at?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. Ongoing. And then Salisbury, 67% to 71%. So Salisbury's almost at that percent of meeting all their targets, so that's exciting too. They've made some great progress over the course of 2018, 2019 with some new programming and new structures that the teachers have been really working hard to implement. So they have a total combined of 69%. So I think I've pretty much mentioned the areas of progress. As a district, we met 74% of our annual criterion reference targets. We are 1% away from meeting all of the targets or being in that particular range as far as annual criterion reference. NES is a school of recognition. They met 94% of their annual criterion reference targets. SES met 71% of their targets. High growth in most areas for most subgroups, and I'm going to get into that in a second. I just felt like science rocks because I'm just so pleased with the accomplishments across the district for teachers, students, and principals in moving the needle around science. Math achievement does continue to increase in most grade levels. There are still pockets of concern that we need to unpack that data and then develop some action plans that we can put into place this year. So let's look at those areas of need.
Kim?
Yep,
I'm sorry,
sorry.
can I ask a question
Yeah,
about the
sure,
math? You said the achievement continues to increase in most grade levels?
Yep.
Are there also subgroups that have
There are. Yep.
deficiencies as well as?
Subgroups?
Yeah.
Yes, third grade.
Thank you.
Yep, third grade. Third grade is the only grade, and again, I say it starts at third grade, but it trickles down. So looking at third grade and really trying to unpack that grade to see specifically where are the concerns are and then how can we best intervene. So the areas of need is looking at those mathematical practices in the early grades, making sure what is being taught is aligned with the state standards. We need to review instructional practices and interventions implemented for students with disabilities. When you look at all the subgroups and you break down economically disadvantaged and you break down students with disabilities and you go into those more detailed reports, our students with disabilities are still not making the gains, even with their growth, that we would like to see them. I would say it's more prominent in the area of math, and I also see it more prominent in upper grades for reading and writing. And so trying to unpack that, and David will talk more about that and some of the actions that are in place right now to address those specific needs. Because that is a huge concern. We have been working with early literacy around early identification. We've just introduced a new version of the DIBELS, which is better in order for us to intervene and really identify which early literacy skills need to be developed. So we still have much more work to do. To me, we can't celebrate until all subgroups are making adequate progress. We're viewing curriculum alignment to the state standards at the high school level because it was a newly aligned assessment, to take a step back to just make sure that what we are teaching is aligned to the standards, and we've made those shifts within the classroom to the extent that we need to look at what type of advanced courses are available to our students and really kind of develop a pathway early on for students so that it's just not offered for some students who excel in academics, but we're starting those conversations and opportunities much earlier on. And looking at that extended graduation rate for how do we continue to engage some of our most at-risk learners beyond their 4 years within the high school. And what can we do differently? So those are really our areas of need that we need to focus on. We've already started to have some conversations how best to respond. So we have a huge technical and adaptive changes within our special education model that David is going to speak in more detail about. We have 6 additional PD days scheduled for our instructional assistants to strengthen their capacity to support students in all areas. Increase the opportunities, again, having those conversations and putting a plan forward to have students enroll in advanced coursework. We're going to provide targeted assistance in the early grades to strengthen mathematical concepts and practices. Pine Grove is piloting iReady for benchmarking around math so that we have early identification and we can look at growth for students. And really review what is currently in place to support students who need more time to fulfill their graduation requirements. What type of supports do they have after that 4-year mark? Do we have counselors in contact with them? Do we have availability for them to access the resources within the school? So what does that look like for those individuals, and how can we improve what we offer for them? So those are just some of the action steps. This process has really developed so early, which is great, because instead of waiting till it was December or January for us, some of this we've already had some early indications, we've already known. I don't think there was anything that we were surprised or shocked at when we saw these reports. I would say for me, the biggest was really looking at the mathematical practices in our elementary grades, and that was a big one for me, and that we really need, we cannot wait, we really need to do something about that. And the other one is making sure that all of our subgroups are making adequate growth. So, and we've already have plenty of things in place right now that we're working on and moving forward with that. So, you know, to me, the big takeaway is that we are absolutely making gains where collectively as a district, we put our resources, our efforts, and our energy. We certainly have more work to do, but to pause and be reflective to say we are providing an education where students can make growth. And that's important, and celebrate all of that whole child picture as opposed to just one piece of it, and continue to encourage that. Any questions? How was that? Was that like an hour? Okay. And that concludes the MCAS, or less. And now over to Tabor, however you want to go.
So no other questions?
Okay, I'm going to shut this
We
down.
have the principals here. We assumed there'd be some questions, but I don't want to like prompt a 4-hour discussion, but
I have one quick question. You talked about, Kim, in your action steps, increase the opportunities for students to enroll in advanced coursework. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what exactly that would look like?
So I know at the middle school, and Al, you can jump in, we already have some students who are taking some higher level math classes who have had the opportunity, because of their experience at elementary level, to bypass the 7th grade math and go right into Algebra 1 as a 7th grader. So opening up those pathways for students to start that process earlier, as opposed to sitting in a math class that is something that they've already learned. So creating more opportunities for that to happen and being creative in how we create those pathways. I don't know, do you want to add to anything, Al?
Al, can you grab the mic, please? I think you can even take it back to your seat with you, with the principals. Is that kosher?
I don't think it's on.
Oh, it is, okay. Yeah, we have presently 4 7th graders taking Algebra 1, which is our only level class in the building. It's the highest level math we teach in middle school. We weren't looking to do that. It kind of organically came out from a couple of parent meetings, just discussing how we can engage some of these students who, a couple of these students got perfect scores on MCAS. So I said, why don't we just try them in 8th grade? And we settled on Algebra 1. So I assume that will probably become more of a trend, and I talked with Mr. Forget today. I said eventually we're going to be starting to blur the lines on math levels, and because now we have 4 7th graders that conceivably have to take geometry in high school next year. We have to figure that out. I do have some thoughts about doing this in other areas, trying to free up teachers to teach some extra sections of their content, give kids somewhat of a pathway through middle school. I touched on a little bit at open house. So this year is going to be a big year about planning for that. It's interesting, it's the first time I've heard that those extended classes, like AP classes, that extends down as far as it does. I didn't realize that, so it's probably good timing that we're talking about this. So yeah, that's the plan. Hopefully, we can do the same thing in maybe a humanities pathway with kids who really like to write and to read well, and obviously sciences and math too. So that's kind of, now it's out there.
Yeah. And just to add to that, the other area that we potentially could create some pathways is around biliteracy. We have applied to have the biliteracy seal for the Triton district, which gives students a special seal that within their diploma when they graduate, that they are proficient in 2 different languages. So there are certainly some criteria involved with that. But again, starting those students in a foreign language earlier, so that when they get to the high school, they don't have to wait to be a junior or a senior to take those advanced level foreign language courses. So another opportunity.
I was just going to say, so along the lines of what Mr. McCrae was saying, last year we had a significant savings of a special education program, high-cost, high-needs program. We were able to, rather than saving the dollars, we were able to invest and put in place the LIFT program and an additional ASD program at the elementary level. Similarly, as cohorts of students are getting smaller, elementary schools, middle school, high school, with a decreasing population, we've unequivocally reduced the number of classroom teachers. But as we move forward and classes get smaller, part of what Mr. McCray is talking about is going to be more opportunities, because that fifth section that a teacher may be teaching, we can break the students into 4 sections and have more flexibility. Putting the, in the forewarned is forearmed, we could save the money and start trimming back teachers. Our hope is that we continue to support those teachers at full-time capacity so that we can provide this advanced coursework that is not only a requirement and a good thing to do because of accountability, but because it's the right thing to do for students.
Any further questions for Kim? All right. Thank you, Kim. Don't drop the mics.
Oh, that's right.
Sure? So when I say all in favor, you raise your hand, okay? You get that? All right, excellent. Thank you, Kim. And moving on to Special Education Services Review, David?
Okay. So as I was preparing for the presentation today, for some reason I had a flashback of my own childhood, where I grew up, and I was born in 1967, and I lived in Boston, and that's when they actually instituted busing. So I don't know if you're familiar with busing, but I lived in a primarily white Irish neighborhood in Rosendale. There was a district called Mattapan, which was predominantly African American, and all the higher ups thought it would be great. Like, let's just take half the white kids and bus them, and then take half the African Americans and bus them, when I could see my school like right across the street. So that if you've ever seen Remember the Titans, when the buses pull up, that's sort of what I remember, sort of what I remembered. And then I looked up Chapter 766, which is when the law came into with students with disabilities for free and appropriate. And the reason why I mention this, it's hard to believe. It seems like it's been a lifetime, but really only 45 years ago we were actually still segregating kids by either disability or race or color. So I think, because when I was reading through the report, because I've been doing this for 30 years, I kept saying, these themes keep coming up, like it keeps coming up over and over. But I think the point being, it really hasn't been that long since our whole system has changed for the better. And I think the focus of this obviously is to improve outcomes, but I just thought that was, because it seems like a lifetime when you hear about segregation or racial issues. It seems like 100 years ago, but it happened in my lifetime. So that's just a little introduction for that. So the last time I think I presented was in September 2018, and submitted a document with an overview and just sort of year by year what sort of happened, what we've done. And it's hard to believe this has been, we've been doing this since 2017. So it's been a long journey, a lot of good discussions. But now we're at the point we have the results. Now the question is, what are we going to do now? Because this is all, schools can get reports and file it away, but our goal is to put in some measures and steps to improve outcomes. So first, I'd just like to thank Mr. Alan Bloom for spending countless of hours with us and adjusting his process along the way. It certainly changed as we had meetings and took a new direction. As I said in last September, we started off by just talking about doing the high school and middle, and then it quickly turned in, well, if we're going to do that, we have to do everything, and then it just turned into this. So if you read the report, it's a pretty massive undertaking. Also, the principals and leadership team who've spent countless hours working on this, and then the parents, teachers, IAs for their participation in this journey, if you will. So I've broken down into talking points, and then you've read the report, so I can refer to the report. But really, so the why is, why did we do this? I mean, we really wanted to gather information and develop a concrete plan or activities to improve educational outcomes for all students in all areas with disabilities. The other reason I think we wanted to engage all stakeholders in giving us their feedback, and I think if you read through the report, there are a lot of strong opinions. People have very emotional opinions about students with disabilities, how to best educate them, what the best approach is. So we wanted to get everybody's feedback and not just have a small number. And then I think to gather information and provide clarity on the roles and responsibilities of regular ed and special ed staff members, that was one of our goals. And then also to obtain information on different service delivery models that may improve educational outcomes. So I've been here for almost 11 years, I think, and we've added programs, we've tried different models, but for the most part, I think we've talked about it, we've had a heavy pull-out model with some kids, that a lot of the kids are getting services outside the classroom, and then they're getting some services inside the classroom, but just to really take a hard look and say, is there anything we can do, even with the same resources, just reallocate them in a different way. So I think in the how, I think on page 4, I think we've sort of gone through this before, but that's really Alan's sort of, all the sort of activities that went into this so far with the surveys, the interviews, the observations, the multiple meetings. So I think we had talked about it in September, but I just wanted to sort of direct you back to that to see it was a comprehensive review. It wasn't just sort of a fluff. Let's see, let's just do this so we can put it in a folder and put it away. Let's see. And then on page 15, so in terms of going right to the results, if you look on page 15, he gives a list of accommodations for the district, which I think most of these we would agree upon as being positive things. The first paragraph really speaks to, I think, everybody's passion and intentions in Triton, whether it's regular ed, special ed, IA, everybody has the same want or the same desire to have the results change, but there may be some disagreement in how that's done. So hopefully this is going to direct us in order to do that. The strong teacher-student relationship, which obviously that's critical. That's almost number one. If you don't have that, it's really hard to improve anything else. Let's see. I think the progress monitoring, and also I thought back to, if you look at the database instruction, even I thought again when I was the special ed director at Newburyport, that I left in 2005, RTI didn't even exist in 2005. So we're only talking, less than almost 15 years that we've actually been able to provide an alternative intervention to students before they get tested and get put on an IEP. So that's a relatively short time in speaking in educational history, and that's something which is also a major improvement. But again, it just is something that's not. It hasn't been that long, because before it was. And I went to a presentation today with the Department of Education. They were talking about the frustration sometimes with certain districts of the sort of wait and see model. Like, oh, let's try things for a couple, 2-3 years, and then the students in 4th grade, and then 2 or 3 years behind grade level. And research shows that the results are very poor if we wait that long. So I think obviously early intervention is a huge part of it. He did mention some of the work that we began to do on the IEPs. So again, I'm not going to go through each one, but I mean, he did. I think it's important, because we obviously need to get to what do we need to do what's better, but to sort of celebrate what we think the district was doing well. And then recommendations, I think, are on page 18. So one of it, I think that the first one that sort of came out was the improving the relationship between general and special educators. And this is not only the relationship, I think it's just an understanding of what the responsibilities are for each staff member, how to collaborate. And some of this is the district's responsibility, because we also need to provide professional development when teachers, special ed and regular ed teachers, can meet together. Right now, sometimes we have so many initiatives going on, and we're directed by the state to do certain things that in the past, the PD has been it's been sort of separate and segregated, that the special ed teachers have their things that they need to accomplish, and regular ed has their initiatives they need to accomplish. So that's certainly something that we had also recognized, so this was not something new to us, but now we have to figure out how we're going to do that moving forward with all the other initiatives that we have to follow. Explore the establishment of co-teaching. Right now, the model is a lot of the special ed teachers, depending on, it's different at each level, but a lot of the teachers are outside the classroom in sort of a resource room. The kids come to them for some intervention, and then there's some work in the classroom, but our goal is to get professionals more into the general ed classrooms, or that's what we would like to see. It's going to take some work, and that has to be sort of discussed with everybody, especially at the high school level. I think that's something that was apparent in his report, that's something that we want to explore. Again, other service delivery options, just what are different ways to provide services to kids that are outside the box that we're not either thinking of or we can learn from other towns. Let's see. Yeah, PD opportunities. The district accommodation plan, which is for all students, one of the things that Alan really wanted to bring home to us is that we really need to ensure that teachers are familiar with this, because this allows all the kids to get certain accommodations. And sometimes I think for teachers, there may be a misunderstanding of accommodation is giving them too much assistance, or I'm not sure I can do this unless they're on an IEP. But if people read the plan, there's a wealth of accommodations that teachers can make without a formal plan, an IEP or a 504. So it's really getting an understanding of that. Transition process, that's something that we've been working on for the past several years, but it's really, especially the major transitions from 6 to 7 and then from middle to high school, is to make sure that all the information that we need to have come up from a level comes up to the next level on the student. And then also sometimes the challenge is the actual schedule. So the elementary, it's a little easier to provide services because you can take kids at different times, and then when you get to the middle and high school, excuse me, there's not a lot of open blocks of time to provide intervention. And because if kids are going, everybody's entitled, to have obviously their core courses, but then also any extracurricular. And in the past, I think some kids have been taken out of the extracurricular to provide the services, but we want to try to figure out a way that, that's sometimes the reality, but we want to figure out a way that they can participate fully in everything, but still get services. And one of the ways could be doing more educating in the classroom itself. So this didn't have to wait at all. We've actually we started this several years ago, was establish uniform IEP strategies and approaches. So Kim was involved, I was involved in the beginning, and Alan, looking through, just pulling IEPs at random and going through them, and he would give us feedback on sort of exactly the way they should be written, the way they should flow, making sure accommodations and modifications are in the right spot. Just so if everybody has a clear understanding on the IEP and the document is well written, then that's going to make everything, because then that's a legal document, and there really can be no dispute on whether it's a nice to have or have to have. We can say this is something that the team agreed upon and this has to be done. So it's not a choice. Let's see. The communication with families, that always, I think communication comes up in every area we try to improve upon. So again, these are the things that you've read about, but I just want to highlight some of them. Some of it, we talked about the structure of our special ed throughout the district. I mean, right now we have half ETCs at the elementary, one at the middle and high. I do the out of district, and are there different ways to sort of change the responsibilities or add some staffing so that would free up the ETCs to do more teaching or spend more time with students. So that's an option we're exploring currently.
Can I just jump in here? I know because Dave's in the midst of it, it's not fair to lay this on him as far as explaining this. So when Christine was the pupil services administrator, right, you had a special ed director working with you. Coordinator. There was a full-time clerk in this office. Each school had a full-time ETC, and each school had a full-time clerk. Today, we have David, we have Sandy, and we have a half-time ETC at every building. And no clerks. So the special ed clerk is Sandy. So part of this discussion is, have we set ourselves up for failure in making decisions over the years where we've saved money, but are we providing the quality document? Because the 5 principals sitting there have a lot of other things to do during the day. So for them to be the gatekeeper of special education, right? The students in a teacher's classroom are the responsibility of the classroom teacher supported by special education. If the principal is responsible for all students in her or his school, if they have to be the gatekeeper to also make sure that they're looking through the IEPs because there's a half-time ETC who's also has a caseload as a teacher and no clerk, so they're writing their own IEPs, I think we've created a structure that doesn't allow us to fix a lot of these problems. So I'm hopeful, again, put it out there now, let's start talking about money, it's almost November. Right now, on paper, it looks like there's potentially several students who might be aging out, which could save some funds so that we could be in the same situation we were last year where we have not a program closing, but some funds being saved that would allow us to provide a solution. Not ready to talk about what that solution might be, but I think that's something we definitely have had some discussion about, that if we want to make sure that we have the quality IEP, which is an important document that's going to drive the quality instruction and the expectations, then we have to have the structure in place to make sure that under David's entire special education paradigm and working with the principals, that they're equipped to be able to provide the services necessary.
Very well explained. And then I think it's important that we, as a leadership team, and I think they can, hopefully they nod, but I won't look over there, that we were all in agreement with what he captured was what we had thought or what we agreed upon, that these are things that needed some improvement. Now, yet there might have been some small things we said, well, I don't know about that, or an individual comment that might have captured that with one person, but I think we were all in agreement that this needs to be looked at, it needs to be addressed, and the areas that he identified are the areas that we also felt were areas that need to be looked at. So, because if that didn't happen, then that would be not in a great place right now if we didn't agree upon it. So what have we done since the report has been drafted? So the leadership team has been on multiple occasions, as we've also met with principals to plan the next step. So in other words, what out of all these areas that we sort of have been identified, what are the next steps we're going to tackle? The IEP, I think the development of that has been well underway, but that continues to make sure that the IEP is well written. Provided intensive professional development for all special education teachers, related service providers district-wide on writing consistent IEPs. So I think Alan's been met with groups 2 times this year to go in and actually, so I had the presentation even as far back as last year. Let's come in, please bring the IEPs that you've written since then, and let's go over them and sort of, let's see if what we're agreeing upon is being written in IEP. So it's a learning curve, because before there was, I think everybody, the department has changed the way they've asked us to write them. Individual people have come in and said, so-and-so said I should do it this way. People go to workshops from DESE and they say do it this way. So we have, and Alan's also working with the Department of Education, so we know that his information is the correct information. So he's working with, because they're looking at developing a new process or tweaking the IEP as it is. So he's on that board with DESE already. So at least, I think we're ahead of the game, because he's not just someone who's making this up on his, that's his own philosophy. Alan provided training to the leadership team as the principals, because they are the ones who do sign I sign a lot of IEPs, but they sign the IEPs in their building. So obviously, they need to be able to sort of know if that meets the standard. Again, our goal in the future is to make sure it gets to them in the best shape it can be and polished and ready to go. So it's not taking a lot of time away from their schedule to then go through it, and then ask the teacher to redo something. So if we have that, if the ETC or the person could pick up that role and know that it was also the IEP meetings held, the teacher writes it, the ETC reviews it, goes through it, and then when it gets sent to the principal, it should be pretty much ready to go, unless there's like a small tweak. But I think right now it's taking, because it's a new initiative, it's taking a little bit more time. But I think as time goes forward, that's a lot to ask for a principal to do that as well.
Can I stop you for 2 seconds for Deb to ask a question,
Sure.
please?
I think that consistency in IEPs throughout the district has numerous benefits to the students, to the teachers, to everybody involved. Can you tell us how many people / who is involved in writing the IEPs? Not just the number of people, but who within the
Right.
schools, the titles, is it a committee, is it one person?
Well, so let's just say, I'll just not make it, like an IEP meeting. Let's say a student has a learning disability, has OT, speech, and PT, has some therapy services. So the team is at the meeting developing the IEP with the parent. So a lot of it's being worked on in the meeting, and then typically each person will go back and do their section. So the OT will write their goals, speech, and then the whoever's a service provider, and then the special ed teacher has the responsibility to write most of it, and then their goals, and then it's submitted to the ETC for them to review, and then after that, it gets sent up to the principal. So depending, but the liaisons or the special ed teachers are are responsible for sort of pulling that all together. But students often have more than one service provider. So then they're responsible for, everybody can enter their own information, then looking through it. So there is a lot. That's a good point, because there could be 10 people working on one document, so.
And my other question is, what happens when there's an outside service provider out of the district? Because doesn't that happen sometimes?
Yep, they're typically at this team meeting, so they might submit, they would probably submit their goal, and then would put it in the service delivery grid. And also now, I think two of the, not everybody does it because of the learning style, but a lot of the the ETCs, we have projectors, so they actually they project the IEP up on the wall and actually go through it with the parents and make changes along the way. I mean, some people's style is different. Some people want to take notes, but so that could be effective sometimes too, that we're making changes that are with everybody present. So, but yeah, it can be a lot of people, which then also makes it more complicated to make sure that everybody's put the information correctly. So sort of after all this too, we then talked about, okay, what next? And we were looking at sort of tackling, transition was a big topic, and then we had met, and this is basically not Kim's idea, but she kind of put on the brakes, or helped us put on the brakes and said, well, wait a second, I think we need to, before we get down to the real technical aspects of the different things, we need to put together, we don't have the name for it now, but we can call it, what did I put down here? A special education advisory group that we sort of talked about that would have representatives from each school. So we're talking about, a big group of approximately 30 people, regular ed, special ed, therapists, principals, myself, Kim, to really go through, and this is a term that I learned today, but we actually obtained the services of another consultant. Her name is Sharon Stewart, and not that Alan didn't do the job that he was hired to do, but she has been in the position of assistant superintendent, administrator, special ed for over 40 years. So she's much more in tune towards public education and programming and IEPs. So we want her to be the facilitator because we feel it's important to have, I think having an outside person is very beneficial, just because that person's sort of guiding the meeting. And she called, first we were trying to figure out the name, whether it was, what are the district's core beliefs or the norms, and then she came up with the term, the philosophical underpinnings of special education. So I mean, so basically this is going to be a more, hopefully a more global discussion to have everybody around and a real honest discussion about what people really think about. I mean, could be something as in terms of, you know, what's a person's philosophy on special education? Like, what does that mean to you in terms of some people can feel, well, I'm helping the student too much, well, I'm not helping the student enough. But we have to figure out before we go any further, what are our core beliefs or the underpinnings, and then make that the reality. I almost look at it like the norms of collaboration, that was done by a group, and then we said, this is what we're adopting, you know, this is after all this work and all this, so this is sort of non-negotiable, these are the things that we feel are important, and there's been representatives from each grade level, each school, administration, regular ed, special ed. So that's going to be the next step. We'll hopefully going to have our first meeting the week before Thanksgiving, and then we're in the process of trying to schedule a time for Alan Bloom to come meet with each school, the regular education teachers, to go through just really sort of the roles and responsibilities based on the training that he's done with everybody else. So that's been the hard part, is trying to find, I mean, there's only so much time during the school day of the school year. So that's going to be one of the next activities. Yeah, and I think we met with Sharon today, so that's as far as, go ahead.
So if I can just add, so the last page of Alan's report, page 25, second to last paragraph, last sentence, says the success or failure of any recommendations to improve educational processes and procedures within the district will depend on staff ownership of any changes and their continued dedication to the success of all students. That's a powerful statement, and I don't believe it's put in there lightly, that one of the key things that Alan talked about was everyone, I believe, and I truly believe this, that everyone was operating from a place of best intentions. People are trying their hardest. They're doing what they believe is in the best interest of students. But 5 different people can have 5 different opinions and all believe they're doing the right thing. But the result is confusion. So I think that is where, you know, what David was talking about, working with Sharon to bring special educators, regular educators, principals, to hopefully have a lot of fights, right? To have good philosophical differences and debates, and to come together to get to that point where we can talk about what we believe. Before we get to all the technical change that's needed, we have to talk about what we believe, the basic things of how we are operating, and then draw all those other changes fall into place. And to kind of go back to where the discussion, we were talking about transition, and we've been talking about transition for 3 years, and all of a sudden we keep talking about we can put all these technical changes into place, but if they fall on deaf ears, for lack of a better term, nothing's going to change, right? So that you can set policy and make me do things, and then I make principals do things, and then principals make teachers do things. But when they're doing it like, here we go, nothing changes. So it's about building consensus, it's about building motivation, it's about building understanding. So unfortunately, that takes time. But I think that the process that we started today with Sharon, and the principals haven't even had a follow-up from the discussion we had, is going to be the really powerful work.
Paul?
So you said you're bringing Alan Bloom in to do some training. What are the roles and responsibilities? And I think that's really important, because one of the themes that I see throughout this is people not understanding other people's roles and not communicating well about the roles. And those sort of nuts and bolts about what are the roles and responsibilities of the general educator, of the special educator, of the IA with implementing the IA is important. But I don't think people really get a feel for what that means unless they start working with a special educator or a general educator or somebody in a different role. And he highlights the idea of bringing co-teaching in as that, but that's a whole transition of how you implement an IEP going that far, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to get there. And before that, you need that communication. I'm lucky enough to be a general educator, married to a special educator, and so I get all of those, not only the nuts and bolts, but the feel, and that has made me a better educator. Not everyone can do that, but getting the shadow, getting the person and getting the feel for what is your life like on a daily basis, or what is it that you do? Like, what does your day look like is really important. And finding professional development time to get groups to pair or to shadow each other might be a way to build towards that ability to communicate that isn't going all the way to the co-teaching model. Because you can't know what someone's responsibility is until you see, as a general educator, what does it mean to write an IEP? Or as a special educator, what does this instruction look like in the day-to-day life of the classroom? Or how is this assessment going to be implemented in the classroom?
Right. Yeah, and I think too, that's a good point, because I was talking to a special educator the other day in terms of, because paperwork is a lot of special education. It's not fun, but it's part of the, so there's the writing the IEPs, there's the testing, there's the meeting. So I think there's all that outside work that a general education teacher may not see or fully understand. But in turn, I was talking to the special ed teacher. I said, but also, if you're a high school English teacher, you might have 100 papers to correct. So it's different. The work is different, but it's still. I think sometimes people look at, like, is it equal? Is my workload equal to the other workload? And I think it's different, but everybody has things outside the school day that they have to accomplish. And I think one of the things in terms of, the word we say co-teaching, but that would take some time. But I think what we've talked about is looking at like small pockets or opportunities in any school. In other words, is there a situation in the high school or wherever where the two teachers are willing to, like you said, give it a try with some professional development, planning time, whatever it takes, and not, we can't just make this sweeping, we're going to change everything overnight, but just to find some pockets, or just look at different situations. Or, you may have kids that really have, maybe they all have a learning disability and have similar needs, and their needs can be met in the classroom. So I think those are the things that we have to look at as we prepare for the budget coming up.
So the other comment I had, again, going back to the IAs are really doing the implementation. I was really happy to see in the MCAS report, I think it popped up, the 5 days of PD for the IAs, because it really looks like this is an area where we need to focus, because the special educators aren't delivering the IEPs, the IAs are, and do they know how to do it as effectively as they can?
Right, and also in some instances, can we adjust resources and hire more professional staff if we find the right opportunity? So that's always a conversation that we've had. So,
Dina?
Thank you. I found this report really interesting, and since PNN is now starting negotiations with the teachers, and we're getting into budget season, there were many different hats I was wearing as I was reading this. A lot of my other concerns have already been addressed, but one that has not been mentioned yet, and I found surprising, was grading for students on an IEP. Can you kind of address that, please, David?
Yeah, I think that's actually, that it's been a pretty major theme that we've talked about, especially at the middle and high school. So I think it does go back to make sure teachers have an understanding of what accommodations and modification a student is entitled to, and making sure they're being graded on that information. Alan also gave the example of the standards. In other words, he said, the typical student, we expect them to meet the standards. A student with a disability, we have to identify the standards we want them to meet and grade them accordingly on what we're expecting of them. So that goes back to making sure we write it in the IEP, that basically there's a section that talks about performance criteria, so we can put more specific information that the student needs to be, graded in a certain level. We even talked about, even percentages, that if a student if we know a student has a situation where they have a very difficult living situation and homework is really going to be either not possible or challenged, we don't want to punish that student for not doing homework. Is there another way to sort of make that make that information up?
So I guess my question is, are we addressing this, or has this, I'm sure we are going to be addressing it. Has this been addressed in the past? Has this been past practice at all?
Yeah, I would say it, but it came to light just because we were concerned with the number that we saw, and I think.
And through interviews, I got that sense too,
Yeah,
from when he was
yeah.
talking to people.
And some of it, I think, and the other thing and this is, even after 30 years, what we're running into is there are certain students, even with all the interventions we're putting in, are simply not doing anything. So they're not being disruptive, they're not being sort of disrupting the class, or for whatever reason, we're shutting down. So something's happening, or we're not reaching them ahead of time to get them to the point, even with all the, so I think then the teacher says, well, how do I, then there's always that back and forth of, well, how do I grade this student if they're not participating, or they're not allowing me to, if they're not allowing me to help them, or even with maximum support, even having the special ed teacher right with them, and so, but that's.
Well, I think this is an example of we could implement a technical change and say that can't ever happen. But the reason that happens is because of a philosophical difference of opinion. So this is not a proposal that we're adopting standards-based report cards at the middle and the high school yet. But if you're measuring the standard, a standard might say ability to represent your voice, blah, blah, blah. A teacher interprets that as you have to be able to write a 5-page essay. Well, it doesn't say you have to write a 5-page essay. That teacher believes that's important. I may agree with that teacher that that's an important skill, but if the student has a writing disability, but they're able to express themselves as required by the standard, well, then they've met the standard. They haven't met the performance criterion that the teacher set, so the teacher would then want to say, well, no, they didn't meet it, so I can't give them an A, but you did meet the standard. Therein lies the rub between grades and standards.
And the other issue that, last point I'll make is semantics seem to mean a lot to this reviewer, to Alan. And my question is, with the district curriculum accommodation plan, he noted the difference between accommodations and modifications. Mm-hmm. And since I am not an educator, I might have an idea of what I think that means, but can you just give me what those definitions are?
Yeah. So a modification is something substantial, and that has to be done by a special education teacher who has that license. So it would be, if a student is working 2 years below grade level, that's a significant modification. And an accommodation is, if a student needed extended time, or rather than doing 10 math problems, they're going to do 5, but you're not really changing the content. So in other words, they understand everything at grade level, but we're not going to require them to do 10 problems to demonstrate it. It's okay if they do 5. So that's an accommodation, but I think that's what his finding was, is that gets mixed up with people. Mm-hmm. So a teacher will say, I can't do that because that's special ed's purview. So that's what we really have to provide the training and the support to say, or even, and this is even some non-special ed kids, that the DCAP is for everybody. So these are things that you can do as a teacher that you don't need, like I said, you don't need permission from special ed or 504, but I think people, it's really, and I think as Brian said, everybody has the best intentions, and I think especially at the middle and high school, as a teacher, they take a lot of responsibility and pride to get the kids ready for the next step. So it's sort of sometimes it's well, if I keep doing this, how am I going to get them ready for post-secondary, or how am I going to get them ready for college? But I think that's when we have to be really clear, that's really not our job right now. Our job is it's a goal, but if it's in the IEP, it's a not negotiable. This isn't something we can talk about. And if a student gets a failing grade and the accommodation wasn't made, then it's got, you got to something's got to happen.
Has to be an adjustment made.
Has to be adjustment, or it doesn't, so but that takes, that takes going back to the teacher and having those, but I think that's what has to happen in order to make change, so.
Thank you.
Linda?
I just would like to make a comment that I'm very impressed that we went down this path of doing an overview of the special education, because as one of our core things, it's excellence for all. So I think with us merging the middle and high school for the scheduling, you're trying to reach the higher students to push them, and now you're looking at our students that don't do so well and trying to look at what we can do as a district. So I want to thank the leadership team for looking at this, because I'm a parent of a special education student, and some of these recommendations here, I think, will really help students going forward. I would just like to say thank you for thinking outside the box, and I know it might take money, but we have to reach every student to make sure that they succeed.
Any other comments? Questions? So I appreciate this report as well. I know that it was a long time coming, a lot of work involved. I do have a couple questions myself. I think coming from kind of outside the world of special education, the thing that was missing for me in this report, and totally understandable that it was missing, was I kind of got an idea of where we are on the process and where we need to go, but I didn't really get a good idea of where we started from. So one of the themes that I kind of saw throughout this in regard to the DCAP and the culture and all that was this sense of awareness around special education and what it is for a lot of the people that are involved. Was there in existence some formal training method or communication method that was supposed to convey that information, or was that simply not happening to start with, and he's suggesting that we need to get to the point where that's happening?
I mean, I think it started through discussions with, first with Brian, myself, and Kim, and then the leadership team around, these are some themes that I had been seeing or they had been seeing, and then I think the fact that, being here 11 years and sort of coming into a system that was already, it was already there, it was already created, and that's the way things have been done, and people have done it for years. So just to say, sort of these little red flags kept popping up along the way, and we just said, we need someone to come in here, and so we met, first when we met with him, we gave him just a general concern, but we said to him, we want to really, not let you loose, but we want you to really go out, and that's, and interview people, and, it's going to be, it's confidential, the surveys, those 240 staff, I think, and then almost 60 or 70 parents. So, I mean, again, when you cast the net that wide, you're going to get some stuff you want to hear and stuff you don't, but, so we sort of just said, I think that's where we started with sort of, these are some concerns that we have based on just the years in the district, and we want you to go in with an open mind as an independent person and just go, and then, so first it took for him to establish the criteria, because a lot of districts could do this different ways. You could get someone to come in and do a very canned report. They could go review IEPs, they'll do a little of this, and then they'll say, so you've met your goal for DESE, I've evaluated, but sometimes it doesn't really go much further. So I think that was our goal, is to sort of have somebody come in without any information about Triton and just sort of let us know what he thought, so.
Yeah, so a lot of those awareness issues were kind of known gaps. Is there things?
I think so, yeah. That we had said these are some areas that we think need improvement, but again, it's hard if you're in the middle of it to separate yourself, because of course, some of the things that of course as my role, it's like you're putting yourself, let's find the good, the bad, the ugly, and so there are, as usual, there's a lot of good, but there's also some, there's some concerns, but I think we all felt it was worthwhile and needed, and also just if you look from the, we're looking at some of the data, if the kids aren't moving the way we want them to, then we need to do something different. We can't just do the same thing, so.
Okay, and I think my other question is, it almost seems where he's finding issues with structure, whether it be schedule or personnel, that type of thing. I'm unclear, I guess, as to whether that was it was previously designed a different way, but then forced to kind of fit into what we had available for personnel and schedule and that type of thing, resources, or if it's essentially functioning the way it was originally designed. So I guess my question is, in one of the cases, he talks about, having 100 minutes of time to something during the space of a week, but the schedule doesn't allow for it. So when you're originally designing that, are you looking at the schedule and the personnel that are available and making that design, or is the IEP like totally existing outside of the personnel and?
I mean, we're supposed to be, legally, you're writing the IEP based on providing a free and appropriate public education, but the schedule is a reality, especially when you move from one school to the other. So it shouldn't be written just because that's what we need to get more creative, especially at the other levels, that if a student does need more pull-out, then we have to find a way to sort of make that happen.
I think that's one of the greatest challenges we've had the discussion. And to go back to the report, I don't think there's anything in the report that shocked anyone. Things that we've seen, good to see it from an outside person coming in through lots of conversations, lots of individuals identifying those things. But it's routine, the discussion is routinely from the elementary level to the middle school, it's a significant difference in the structure of the day. So you develop the IEP around the student's needs. At the elementary level, you have general content teachers that have the students, other than specials and switching, for 6.5 hours a day. When you move to the middle school level, you move into a structure where it's full rotation of departmentalization. So we can say, well, no, that the IEP needs to be fully developed around the needs of the child, but the child has to exist within the middle school. We have to provide the student the same opportunities that every other middle schooler has. So it's not the middle school's fault, it's not the elementary's fault, but it's one of those things we've had the discussion. That's why we have to communicate better. We have to figure out how to talk about that transition process. And we've talked about ideas of maybe sharing, more ETCs and sharing one that blends from the middle school into the elementary level so that there's starts to move and have a person who's responsible for that transition, because it's a big transition. It's a big transition for every student. When there's a student receiving services through an IEP, it's an even bigger transition. So, that's absolutely a huge issue. It's one that we have to tackle. And again, I think it goes back to it's a bigger philosophical discussion that would drive the decisions we make.
But then also I would say it's also having the elementary school understand what the middle school structure looks like. Is what we did last year. We had teachers from the elementary and ETCs come up to the middle school to go into the classroom and spend a couple hours to see how the service model was, because the middle school does have their regular teachers in the classrooms more. So in other words, it may not be, so parents need to understand, and elementary schools may need to understand that, okay, we don't necessarily need to do all this. We need to do some pull-out, but there's also going to be somebody in that classroom when your child's taking English that's a special ed teacher and a regular ed teacher. So that's almost co-teaching without trying to do it. So part of it, it was a lack of understanding, because the elementary didn't really realize how the middle school worked, and the middle school didn't really understand, or vice versa. So I think there needs to be more of that, so people are actually coming up and spending time and seeing there's different ways sometimes, so.
And I think we addressed the kind of scheduling question, but I'll go back to ask the kind of personnel question about the same thing. So it seemed like a lot of the direct instruction was following on the IAs. Was that designed in the IEP to be delivered that way, or is it literally a set of needs and no one's assigned to deliver it, but the IAs are the available personnel?
I would say, the direct instruction is mostly provided by the special education teacher, but it's typically out of the classroom. So in other words, they have either a small reading group or they have individual time, and the IAs are supporting the kids in the classroom. So they have to be aware of the children's goals and IEP, but I think, so that, yeah, so it's not, we're not expecting a lot of the IAs to do research-based reading programs with the students.
Okay.
So, but it really depends on, you basically write the IEP in the service of what the student's going to need. So if a student, say, has a specialized reading program and they need that 4 times a week, but the team also feels that the student can't be in the regular classroom, or the teacher's going to need assistant, and usually it's with more than one student.
Okay.
So these are students who are going to need extra support, and that's why the IA is put into the classroom. But sometimes a special ed teacher, depending on the schedule, can go into the classroom, but what we're saying with the IEP is not at minimum, but we're guaranteeing an IA in the classroom, but the special ed teacher may be in there as well, or have some flexibility, so.
Okay, so it's more about the services the student needs than the personnel that's delivering it. Is that?
That's the way the IEPs are written.
Yeah.
But back to the decisions, and I would love to have the principals tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think there was ever a line in the sand drawn, a decision made to say, we're going to use this model.
Mm-hmm.
It's a series of individual decisions that have been made over the last 20 years that cumulatively we've arrived where we are today. Is that a fair, or we never made a decision, we're only using IAs, we're only using special educators? It's just been the ebb and flow. I think if we said to the principals, you could each have 4 more special educators, they wouldn't refuse them, right? So there's been a lot of financial decisions made as we've trimmed back, like we talked about earlier. Just the support of developing IEPs was trimmed way back, so.
Many of our IAs are one-to-one, IAs assigned individually
Yeah.
to students based on need as well.
Yeah, so in an IEP, you can have a one-to-one, true one-to-one, or a high level of support. That's generally what what IAs are doing, is providing that very intensive support one-on-one with students.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
All right, we just hurdled the 2 biggest pieces of the agenda, so moving right on. And thank you to the principals for coming.
Thank you to the principals for coming,
Sorry.
yes. Go home. You all have early mornings.
Moving on to the monthly report of the superintendent of schools, please.
All right, we're going to go at a record pace. Stadium and track repair. Cape and Island Track is mobilizing this Friday. You'll see a trailer out in the parking lot. They're going to begin the repair on Saturday. It might actually be done by Monday. That is the repair on the inside of the D area in the inside 3 lanes of the northwest corner of the track. Okay? Second piece of that repair is the length of the straight against the wall. Having lots of surveyors shoot lots of different points to make sure the wall isn't moving at this point. The wall is not sinking, the pathway within it is. So we believe we have a plan in place. Need to put a price to it. It was going to come down to, they'll fix it. David White & Sons will fix it and repair it at their cost. I'm likely going to come to you, or hopefully by next week to the Finance Subcommittee, to talk about a cost to repair it the right way, which is actually replacing the asphalt with concrete, which could cost $20,000. The question is, do we have one-time funds and the stadium funds? Because that concrete moves less, right? So if that straight from the back wall is all concrete up against the wall that you'd be walking on, it has a significantly reduced chance of moving. It wasn't designed that way originally. We don't need to do concrete. But it might be the better alternative. But it wouldn't be, David White & Sons would put it back to where it should be with asphalt as it is now at no cost to us. The decision will be, do we want to spend a little extra dollars? I don't know what the number is yet. I'm using 20,000 to replace all that asphalt with concrete, because it would be 100 yards, end goal, end line to end zone to end zone, about 10 to 12 feet wide, concrete. That's expensive, rebar. So hopefully bring a number to Finance Subcommittee next week. If not, I hope to bring that to you in November, to the full committee. It is something that they can do. It's a David White crew. We've been waiting forever for Cape and Island Track because they're one of really the only company in Massachusetts that does the track surfacing, the concrete work. They have plenty of crews. They could have, if we said yes right now, they could have a crew here next week. So hopefully that's something we can do this fall. Graduation date. Kaylee mentioned this. We looked at it. We talked about it. Survey was actually 2-to-1 in favor for parents of moving to a Friday night. Students, as you heard Kaylee talk about, were rather mixed. Faculty was overwhelmingly in favor of it. Ultimately, when we talked about it, Friday would be an incredibly busy day, the way that we currently have it structured. Many of you have sat through the award ceremony that can last 3 hours. It's a great event. But to have that up against the junior-senior breakfast, then to have any time for kids to go home and get pretty for graduation, as we talked about, to have the nice light at graduation, and to be back here, and it would make for a crazy day. So we're going to continue the discussion with Patrick, with the student council, and through the school council as well, but talk about the entire commencement exercises process. Do we continue the awards ceremony as it is? Do we move that tonight? Is it an all-school thing? So for now, we're putting that on hold, which means that I won't be at graduation, but I'm going to think about something fun, someone fun to stand in my place. Comprehensive Facilities Assessment, still on track to have a draft report by November 15th, final report by December 15th. It's going to give high-level figures. They're going to be shocking numbers. North Shore Roundtable Legislative Action, just wanted to put a shout out in my report here, my appreciation. We've had a lot of discussion about the North Shore. We were talking about that at Policy and Advocacy earlier. Whether we're talking about superintendents or school committee members or Facebook groups that Narissa's part of, or you name it, the North Shore keeps coming up over and over and over again. Our legislators found a way, or we found a way to bug people through our legislators. So people are listening, and so I want to just shout out to our legislators for the work they've done. And then a Pine Grove update, we're on punch listing. At this point in time, as of today, I did, Tom Hood, who's the project manager, has confirmed that he still believes all punch list items will be done by a week, another full week. It's mostly things that you won't see. There are things, and you'll know the flagpole disappeared today because they have to re-pour that, because I don't know if you noticed that, anyone who was at the grand opening, it's not straight. So all those little things are getting fixed. That's probably the most grandiose thing that you'll actually see. Everything else is finishing fencing, punch list. I want to say there was 233 pages of locations to come in, quick swath of paint. So it's on progress. It's looking great. And that's all I have to note about that. Any questions? I'm sorry to happily answer them.
Questions? Any members? All right, excellent. Moving on to the MASC proposed resolution. So at our last meeting, we had voted Linda to be our official delegate, and I'll be the alternate. Brian's attending, but the only other possible attendee from school committee is Paul Lees. As far as I know, he still has not made a decision on whether he's going or not, but we're not relying on him to show up. So it'll be very likely Linda at this point. The resolution committee sends out the resolutions every year, the draft ones. They can be amended on the floor. We always give the committee an opportunity to review the resolutions and provide Linda, the delegate, with any direction that we want to provide on any additional amendments that should be in there, how we, opinions we might have on how she should vote, that type of thing, since she is representing the committee at the resolutions assembly. So do we have, I know a lot of these are pretty straightforward. Some of these I think are duplicates from past years, I feel like. I don't know if that's definitely true. I didn't go back and compare, but I didn't see anything in here that was glaring for me. I don't know if.
I have one that I want to raise. It's resolution number 2. Mm-hmm. It's pertaining to education, diversity, and professional licensure. I kind of want to pick the brains of our administrators, and the only school committee member who is also a teacher will probably have an opinion. To me, this seems like this is a union issue, and I'm not quite sure why MASC felt like they needed to get involved with that, but if you guys could weigh in on that. Specifically, the last paragraph where it says, "Therefore be it resolved that the Massachusetts Association of School Committee calls for the elimination of the MTEL and the Mass Performance Assessment for Leaders." Can you shed light on that for me? Why would they feel that that is important to eliminate?
So I can. Now I can. The MTEL is the overall teaching test. So my understanding is the argument against the test is it creates biases for folks who may not have come from a white male background, right? Summaries. So I think that concept is the driving force behind the elimination of the MTEL. I don't know that I know enough to advise you to say whether I agree or disagree with that. I do get the sense that we have a system in the state that doesn't necessarily encourage diverse applicants. I think that's a much bigger issue than the MTEL. The PALS assessment it's a performance assessment for leaders. Now, if you do your program, you get your Mass Principals license, and then you have to do this PALS. It's like a 4-part test that you have to pass, and it's a performance. So 4 things you have to do. It seems more redundant than anything else. I think any of us would tell you, yeah, license is great, but the on-the-job training is where you learn everything. So I think the angle that MASC is heading towards is find different ways to credential teachers, look at alternative approaches, similar to a high school. When you have a physicist who has spent 25 years being a physicist, one would argue they'd be a decent teacher if they're a good communicator. So why are we going to make them go through the rigmarole of an MTEL test to sit and make sure they're a good teacher? If we believe that they're good and right, you want to interact with the person. If they're a scientist who shouldn't be with people, that's a different discussion. But yeah, I don't know that I know enough about this to advise you either way.
I guess my question is, when we get the school report cards and it says highly qualified teachers, is this what they're referring to, whether they've passed MTEL or any of that?
So MTEL is a component of licensure. So they're highly qualified if they have a license. Doesn't matter how you got your license, it's if you have the license. So you can have a temporary license. You come from Vermont, we have reciprocity. You have a year to get a new license. You then get a provisional, then a provisional now, initial's gone, provisional, professional, and then every 5 years you have to get 150 PDPs in order to renew that licensure. So the highly qualified is whether or not you have a license.
Okay. Paul, do you have an opinion?
MTEL's a meaningless measure of your ability to teach. I'm a licensed chemistry teacher. I took a chemistry class my 10th grade year in high school. I passed the MTEL 10 years later. I hadn't taken chemistry in between. I know nothing about chemistry. I taught chemistry for a few years. I mean, I can do it because I'm a good teacher, not because I could pass the MTEL, which measured literally nothing about what was required to go into that classroom and teach. That said, I think the more important piece of this is that it's calling for a board of governance and licensure of professional educators to be vested in a board. Like, you're looking for people to make the criteria who know what it takes to be a good teacher rather than setting criteria in order to have criteria. And is this important? I don't know. I think the end piece is important, change how we're licensing teachers. What we're doing is not necessarily finding those people.
I mean, I do agree. There's a lot of things that I think, I don't want to speak for any other administrators in the district. DESE does good things, but many times I get it, bureaucracy protects against those who are not going to perform well. There are a lot of times we could make decisions that are hindered by a decision like licensure. Or a structure like licensure, whereas we have an incredibly qualified candidate, and maybe they're not a good test taker, maybe they can't pass the test, or maybe they've come through an alternative pathway. So
I can speak from personal experience on not being a good test taker. I was the first class that sat for the MTEL test, and I was offered a job at a different school system, and because I didn't pass one of the 3 sections right away, I had a 69 instead of a 70, I lost my teaching position. So I was not given the opportunity to teach. That is despite going to a state college, completing the state program with honors, and making it through all the criteria to get my degree. I wasn't able to be qualified to teach because I didn't pass this test. So I would agree that I don't feel that it's a good measure for a good educator or a good teacher or somebody that's willing to put in the effort to what it takes to do. It's just measuring one point in time to be able to sit and pass the test.
Okay. And I apologize, Erin, I didn't realize you had the education background as well.
That's fine.
Okay. Any other, I mean, I guess I would take a cue from you, Dina. Is that one that you?
That's one I wouldn't support, but I would be curious, Linda, when you are there at the delegate assembly, what the feedback is from the group. That just strikes me as an odd one for MASC to go after.
Linda?
Well, that particular test is what you can say about MCAS and SAT as well.
True.
Okay. Any other guidance for Linda? Do I need a vote? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve resolutions 1 and 3 through 9? I'm going to put that forward to start with, and we can always re-amend if we need to. As proposed by the Mass Association of School Committees and published in the member packets.
Can I say that what I would like to see, I didn't like this motion. I think what we should be doing is voting to have Linda vote. She's gotten our input. Have her vote what she feels would be in line with our committee, because so many times you could be at that delegate assembly and there will be amendments made by other districts that affect the whole tone of the resolution. So I would feel more comfortable just voting to allow Linda to use her best judgment when voting on these resolutions on behalf of our committee.
Would you like to make that motion?
I just did.
All right. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Kim, you moved back to the other side of the table. You didn't get to vote. Man, no flavor. Subcommittee reports and action items, policy and advocacy. Linda? I think your mic's off.
I guess we want to approve remote participation at school committee meetings as a second reading.
I'll make a motion to approve the remote participation as a second reading.
Second.
Any discussion on this? All in favor? Unanimous?
And then a general and long-term funds investment policy statement to approve the general long-term funds investment policy as a second reading.
I'll make a motion to approve the general long-term funds investment policy as a second reading.
Second.
Any discussion on this one? All right, all in favor? Excellent, thank you. And anything else that you want?
No, just, I want to thank everybody for all the letter writing, all the phone calls, everything that we've done to get some of these recommendations in place. Brian and Arissa have already spoke about what the North Shore has done. Other than that, nope.
All right, excellent, thank you. Deb, Finance Subcommittee, and do you want to brief first, and then Dina can
Oh, well, we
ask
had
about the minutes?
We had our regular regular monthly meeting. All of the reports are included in your packet. I think of the reports in your packet, the ones that we discussed, the one that kind of is going through the most changes would be the revolving accounts. And they're being streamlined and handled differently. And this is, Brian mentioned earlier, some of the things that Michelle has done that have been very positive in the last couple of years. And this is going to be one of them, and it will make things a lot more consistent throughout the district. If you have any specific questions, happy to answer them. But the revolving accounts is the one that is going to, I think, be the most changed. And Dina.
Thank you, Deb. The question that I had is on the section regarding, it's on the top of the second page, the municipal Medicaid reimbursement. That was budgeted for $200,000, and we will not be receiving the full amount. and it seems like it's due to the reporting issues. I'd like to know a little bit more about what the staffing requirements are, because to me, $200,000 is not a small amount to kind of just overlook, unless I'm reading this wrong.
I can say from our discussion there, Michelle is very unsure about kind of what is going to happen. So she thought even if we had full staffing in place, we may not be able to capture that full $200,000. So it was going to be a matter of the time put forward to what she thinks the payoff was going to be as far as kind of maximizing our amount. And that was something that she was still working on at the time of our conversation.
Okay, so it's not like we're not going to receive anything, but it's just that to try and get to the maximum would be very difficult.
It's changing what qualifies for reimbursement. So it's a federal program. It's a change in what services are billable, if you will. So it's going to decrease our reimbursement. It's not going to decrease the whole 200,000. The note was, we're budgeting 200. We're not going to hit the 200. I mean, in talking to her, 100, 150, maybe. But it's not a budget buster at this point, at least, as far as we know. It's just a massive unknown. Medicaid has never been dependable and consistent. It always comes in when the claims come in. But it's the qualifying services that is changing.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other question I had was, why are we over budget, it seems like, on, for utilities and data and phone services? That was in the revolving, I believe.
Wouldn't be in revolving.
Or, not revolving,
In general fund?
year-to-date, yeah.
I believe, I have to look at the line.
Because I thought we had utilities, we've been doing all the incentive programs and all of that to keep
Yep.
our costs down, so I'm not
I believe,
clear.
and we just relocked, I believe Michelle's statement at the meeting was, she's looking at that because she doesn't believe it's accurate.
Right.
Am I remembering that right?
Yes.
That she believes is an encumbrance that's incorrect. As far as data, is that data and technology?
Yeah.
I believe that still has to do with how Comcast, we get 60% of that reimbursed through E-rate. Our data bill for the data services, the internet services for this district, it's $130,000 a year. It's a pretty decent data connection. 80,000 of that is paid, I believe that's the number, 80 some odd thousand by E-rate. It's supposed to be deducted from the bill. It's not. It's still being reimbursed to us. So again, this has to be reflected, adjusted. So it's about adjusting encumbrances.
Okay, great.
I believe that's, am I right? I mean, I believe she said there's nothing that was alarming her on these.
No, there
She
was.
believes they're wrong.
No, there wasn't.
Yeah,
And
the
goodness
encumbrances
knows
are wrong.
Michelle
And a lot of the
would tell us if
encumbrances
she
are
were
still.
alarmed.
Yeah, so what she did say is, and now, again, we're running our own payroll in-house. So we have our own payroll system, so now encumbrances for payroll are eons more accurate here in October than they ever were. Being that that's, what, $24 million of our budget? That's good to have that encumbered, and it's now refining the others.
Great.
This should be the savings on insurance. Is also not accurate. There's not $3.7 million balance there. But once we fully encumber insurance, there should be savings as well, because you remember we made changes through the PEC that we did not adjust. It was after the final budget.
She actually said at our last meeting that she feels pretty good about where we are.
That's
Don't
the
anybody
important
misconstrue
piece.
that.
Yeah.
All right. And I understand that I should be looking at Paul Lees right now, but he's not here. So I'm going to look at you again, Dina. I'm
Have a
sorry.
good experience as the chair.
Yes, okay, so P&N met this past Tuesday, and we elected Paul as the chair, given that I will not be continuing after the spring.
Perhaps.
Brian. So we've begun to look at the topics that we want to raise with the TRTA, and to date, we have 8 meetings set up already on the calendar, so we are ready to get started. Our next meeting will be on the 29th of this month.
I was going to say 25th, yeah. 29th,
End of the month.
end of the month.
That's it, thanks.
Okay. and there was no correspondence in your packet. So I will thank you for coming tonight. Oh, Deb?
I just have a question about what's going on here Saturday night.
Really, really, Miss Choate.
Oh.
So I do want to say, I want to thank all of
Okay.
the young teachers who stepped forward, because I thought I was going to have to be. So it's the Triton All-Stars versus the Harlem Wizards, which used to be the Harlem Globetrotters.
No.
It's going to be a fun event. You can buy tickets at the door. I think tickets range from $17 for general down to $40 if you want courtside. It's the Triton All-Stars versus the Harlem Wizards. Dave and I will be out on the court. Kim? Oh, Kim decided not to. Oh, that's right. Yeah. So there are several principals, but there are several younger teachers who are really excited about this, because I'm mostly nervous. I did not play basketball in high school or ever. So it will be fun. Apparently, it's very funny. I haven't seen them in a long time, but apparently it's a very entertaining event. So come watch some good basketball by other players. And I guess there's a competitive third quarter that anyone who really wants to play competitive basketball, I will be on the bench. As will Dave. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And before we...
Lots of braces.
Yeah. Tylenol. It's good stuff. All right. I just need to go back real quick because Dina and Sandy just tipped me off that we need to go back and officially approve the Finance Subcommittee minutes from Wednesday, September 25th, since we had pulled those.
Oh.
So can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the Finance Subcommittee meeting minutes. Yes.
Yes. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any further discussion? All in favor? All right. Thank you. And now can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All right. Excellent. Thank you. Long time.